In vast desert landscapes, ancient ships lie buried in sand far from any sea. Huge and remarkably preserved, they seem seaworthy. Were these regions once oceans, or did unknown civilizations relocate them? Each find challenges history, suggesting lost knowledge mysteries. The Sahara stretches endlessly beneath the relentless sun, a landscape where nothing should survive except scorpions and silence. Yet beneath its surface, archaeologists keep finding something that shouldn't exist. Ships. Not fragments, not echoes. Actual vessels, some large enough to carry dozens of people, resting in sand hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. In 2015, a team excavating near an ancient Egyptian trade route uncovered the hull of a boat buried 40 feet below the surface, its wood still holding the shape of something built to cut through waves, not dunes. The discovery wasn't isolated. From the deserts of Peru to the arid basins of Central Asia, ships keep emerging from places where water hasn't flowed in millennia. These aren't legends or myths passed down through generations. They're physical objects you can touch, measure, and radiocarbon date. And the deeper researchers dig, the less sense any of it makes. Some of these vessels predate known maritime technology in their regions. Others appear to have been deliberately buried, carefully placed rather than abandoned. A few show signs of having sailed recently, geologically speaking, in waters that vanished thousands of years before human civilization supposedly began. The traditional narrative of human history assumes we know where the oceans were, where people lived, and how they moved across the planet. But what happens when you find evidence of ancient seafaring cultures in the middle of wastelands that have been dry since the Ice Age? What happens when the ships themselves contradict everything we think we understand about climate, geography, and the rise of civilization? In 2000, workers constructing a pipeline through Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert hit something solid 20 meters underground. They expected rock. What they found was wood, specifically the remains of multiple ships arranged in what looked like a deliberate formation, their bows pointing in the same direction as if they'd been anchored together. The vessels weren't small fishing boats. Preliminary analysis suggested ocean-going craft, built for deep water navigation, sitting in one of the most landlocked regions on Earth. The discovery sparked immediate questions. The Aral Sea lies hundreds of miles away, and even at its historical maximum extent, it never reached this location. The Caspian Sea tells the same story. So how did an entire fleet end up buried in the middle of nowhere? One theory suggests these ships were part of a massive overland transport, perhaps dragged by armies or traders moving between bodies of water that no longer exist. But the logistics are staggering. Each vessel would have weighed several tons. Moving even one across that distance would require hundreds of people, specialized equipment, and a reason compelling enough to justify the effort. Why not simply build new ships when you reached water again? Why preserve and transport the old ones? Another possibility is even stranger. These ships never moved at all. They sank where they sailed, and the desert came to them. But that would mean Turkmenistan hosted a navigable body of water within the time frame of human civilization, something no geological survey has ever confirmed. The ships remain there, half excavated, while researchers argue over explanations that all seem equally impossible. The Taklamakan Desert in western China translates roughly to "go in and you won't come out." It's one of the harshest environments on the planet, a sea of sand dunes that can reach 300 feet high, shifting and reforming with every wind. In 1986, archaeologists working near its southern edge discovered something that shouldn't survive in such conditions. A wooden ship, remarkably intact, with design features suggesting it was built for lake or river travel. The vessel dated to approximately 1000 BCE, a period when this region supposedly supported small agricultural settlements, not maritime activity. But the ship told a different story. Its construction showed evidence of regular use. Wear patterns on the oars, repair work on the hull, staining that could only come from repeated exposure to water. This wasn't a ceremonial object or a burial offering. It was a working boat that had seen real service. And it wasn't alone. Subsequent excavations revealed remnants of at least 12 similar vessels scattered across a 30-mile radius, all buried at roughly the same depth. The pattern suggests these ships operated on a body of water that covered a significant area, a lake or inland sea, that supported enough traffic to justify maintaining a fleet. Chinese historical records from this period make no mention of such a lake. Climate data indicates the region was already arid by 1000 BCE, yet the physical evidence is undeniable. Something capable of supporting boat traffic existed here, used regularly enough that people built, maintained, and eventually lost multiple vessels. The gap between what the archaeological record shows and what we think we know about this region's environmental history is so wide that researchers still can't reconcile it. Either our understanding of ancient climate patterns is fundamentally wrong, or these ships represent a civilization whose entire geographic context has been erased from both historical record and geological memory. The Atacama Desert in Chile holds the distinction of being the driest place on Earth, with some weather stations recording zero rainfall for decades. It's a landscape so hostile to life that NASA uses it to test Mars rovers. In this supremely inhospitable environment, researchers in 1997 found a ship. The vessel was large, over 40 feet long, and showed construction techniques consistent with ocean-going craft from approximately 800 CE. But it sat 60 miles inland from the current coastline, at an elevation that would require the Pacific Ocean to rise nearly 200 feet above its present level to reach. The standard explanation points to tectonic activity. South America's western coast is geologically active, and land uplift could theoretically raise a coastal area inland over centuries. But the math doesn't work. The amount of uplift required would have been catastrophic, leaving obvious geological scars across the entire region. Those scars don't exist. The landscape around the ship shows no evidence of the massive tectonic forces that would be necessary to move it from sea level to its current position. More puzzling still, the ship wasn't found on ancient beach deposits or marine sediments. It sat in sand that shows no chemical markers of salt water, no fossil evidence of marine life, nothing to indicate the ocean ever reached this spot. Some researchers have proposed an alternative. Maybe the ship never touched the Pacific. Maybe it sailed on a different body of water entirely, one that formed temporarily during a climatic anomaly and then vanished completely, leaving no trace except the vessels it stranded. But that raises another question. If such a body of water existed recently enough for humans to build ships and sail on it, why does no human record, no oral tradition, no written account, no archaeological evidence of coastal settlements acknowledge its existence? The ship sits in a museum now, its wood slowly deteriorating despite preservation efforts. It remains a physical impossibility, proof of ancient sailing in a place where no water should have existed. Academic conferences on ancient maritime history have become battlegrounds over desert ship discoveries, with researchers splitting into camps that can't reconcile their interpretations. One faction insists these vessels are evidence of radical climate change, proof that Earth's water distribution has shifted far more dramatically and recently than current models suggest. They point to sediment analysis showing possible lakebeds in currently arid regions, to pollen records indicating vegetation that would require substantial rainfall, to geological formations that could represent ancient shorelines. The opposing camp argues for human agency, that ancient peoples moved these ships overland for reasons we don't fully understand. They cite examples of verified ship transport, like the Viking vessels dragged across Russian portages or the boats carried over mountains in ancient South America. They suggest ritual significance, arguing that cultures might have transported ships to burial sites or ceremonial locations far from navigable water, but both explanations struggle with the physical evidence. The climate change theory requires water volumes and distributions that don't match ice core data or ocean sediment records. If massive inland seas existed recently enough for human civilizations to sail on them, where did the water go? Climate changes don't typically evaporate hundreds of cubic miles of water in a few centuries without leaving dramatic evidence in the geological record. The human transport theory faces equally daunting problems. Moving a multi-ton wooden ship across hundreds of miles of desert would be among the most resource-intensive projects imaginable, comparable to building the pyramids or Great Wall. Yet we find no supporting infrastructure. No roads capable of bearing such weight, no settlements large enough to provide the necessary labor force, no written records describing such monumental undertakings. A third group of researchers has begun proposing hybrid theories. Maybe both climate and human activity played roles, or maybe we're misunderstanding the timeline entirely. Perhaps these ships are older than they appear, placed during wetter periods and preserved by the extreme dryness that followed. But radiocarbon dating keeps contradicting these comfortable explanations, producing ages that fall squarely within historical periods when the deserts were supposedly as dry as they are now. In 2008, a research team excavating in Egypt's western desert, nearly 200 miles from the Nile, uncovered a ship that broke every rule. The vessel measured over 60 feet long, constructed with sophisticated joinery techniques and a hull design optimized for deep-water sailing. Initial estimates placed it around 2,500 BCE, contemporary with Egypt's Old Kingdom. But then the tests came back. Carbon dating suggested the wood itself was approximately 4,000 years old, which matched expectations. However, analysis of organic material trapped in the ship's seams, residue from pitch used to waterproof the hull, dated to nearly 7,000 years ago. The discrepancy was impossible. Either the ship was built from 4,000-year-old wood using 7,000-year-old pitch, or the dating methods were contaminated. Repeated testing confirmed the results. The ship appeared to be a composite of materials from wildly different time periods, assembled in a location that shouldn't have supported shipbuilding at any point in human history. Even more bizarre, metallurgical analysis of copper fittings found in the hull showed alloy compositions that didn't match known Egyptian metalworking from any period. The copper contained trace elements consistent with ore sources in southern Africa, over 3,000 miles away, processed using techniques that wouldn't be developed in that region for another 2,000 years according to standard archaeological timelines. Similar chronological impossibilities have emerged from other desert ship discoveries. A vessel found in Peru's Sechura Desert contained rope made from a plant species that went extinct in that region approximately 5,500 years ago. Yet the rope showed minimal degradation, far less than would be expected from millennia of burial. Another ship, discovered in Australia's interior, had wooden pegs preserving growth rings that indicated the trees were harvested during a climatic period that doesn't match any known wet phase in that continent's history. These aren't simple dating errors or contamination. They're systematic contradictions suggesting either our chronologies are fundamentally flawed, our understanding of ancient resource networks is incomplete, or these ships have preservation and construction histories that don't fit into any linear historical narrative. The objects exist, they're not hoaxes, but they occupy a space between what we know happened and what the evidence actually shows, a gap that keeps widening with each new discovery. Standard geological models tell us where water was and when. Ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland preserve atmospheric records going back hundreds of thousands of years. Ocean sediments capture the chemical signatures of sea level changes. Lakebed deposits mark the boundaries of ancient water bodies. These records paint a comprehensive picture of Earth's hydrological history, and according to that picture, the deserts where we keep finding ships have been arid for tens of thousands of years, long before humans developed sailing technology. But the ships keep contradicting the models. In 2012, satellite imaging of the Sahara revealed what looked like ancient river channels beneath the sand, vast networks that would have required enormous water volumes to create. Follow-up ground surveys confirmed the channels and found something else. Ship remains at intervals along the now dry riverbeds, positioned as if they'd been tied to moorings that no longer exist. The channels themselves present a puzzle. Their scale suggests they were carved by water flow comparable to the Amazon or Mississippi, yet they appear in regions where climate models indicate rainfall has been minimal for over 50,000 years. Either the models are wrong about the Sahara's hydrological history, or these channels formed through some process we don't understand. The ships complicate matters further. If they sailed these channels, they did so during a wet period that would have made North Africa lush and inhabitable, exactly the kind of environment that should have left abundant archaeological evidence of human settlement. But evidence of such settlements is sparse and controversial. We find the ships but not the cities. We see the channels but not the farmlands that should have surrounded them. It's as if someone placed all the pieces of a thriving maritime civilization into the landscape, then carefully removed every other trace that such a civilization existed. Some researchers have proposed that rapid climate change could explain the pattern, a sudden shift from wet to dry that happened so quickly, human populations fled rather than adapted, leaving only their ships behind. But climate doesn't change that fast without catastrophic causes. Asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, or other events that would leave unmistakable marks in the geological record. Those marks aren't there. The ships remain, silent witnesses to a geographic reality that existed but left almost no other evidence of its existence. One of the most baffling aspects of desert ship discoveries isn't that the ships exist, it's that they're still intact. Wood deteriorates. In normal burial conditions, organic material breaks down within centuries, consumed by bacteria, insects, and chemical processes. Even in dry environments, wooden objects typically last only a few thousand years before crumbling to dust. Yet some of these desert ships show preservation that defies explanation. A vessel excavated from the Namib Desert in 2003 retained structural integrity that shocked conservators. The wood hadn't just survived, it was still flexible in some areas, still held joinery so tight that modern tools could barely separate the pieces. Radiocarbon dating placed the ship at approximately 3,200 years old, yet its condition suggested it had been buried for decades, not millennia. Laboratory analysis found the wood contained almost no bacterial degradation, no insect damage, and chemical composition that looked remarkably similar to fresh-cut timber. The preservation was so perfect it initially raised suspicions of fraud, but subsequent investigation confirmed the ship's age and authenticity. The extreme dryness of desert environments can slow decay, but it doesn't stop it completely. Even mummies from Egypt's driest tombs show more deterioration than some of these ships. Something about the burial conditions, the specific chemistry of the sand, the depth of burial, or factors we haven't identified, has created a preservation environment that exceeds anything achievable in modern conservation. Another ship, found in Chile's Atacama, contained rope and fabric sails that retained tensile strength. Researchers could pull on the ropes without them breaking, could unfurl sections of sail that should have disintegrated thousands of years ago. The materials showed no signs of the brittleness or fragmentation that normally accompanies extreme age. Carbon dating confirmed they were ancient, but their physical condition suggested they were nearly new. This level of preservation opens uncomfortable questions. If organic materials can survive this well in certain desert conditions, how many other artifacts might be buried out there, perfectly preserved, waiting to be discovered? And more unsettling, if we're finding ships that look this good after thousands of years, how can we be certain of the age of any organic artifact? What if our assumptions about deterioration rates are wrong, and some of these ancient ships are actually far older than we think, preserved so perfectly they appear younger than they are? The ships don't appear randomly. That's what bothers researchers most. If these vessels were simply abandoned in places that later became deserts, you'd expect scattered individual discoveries. Instead, they often appear in groups, arranged in patterns that suggest intention. In Mongolia's Gobi Desert, a cluster of 7 ships was found buried in a nearly perfect circle, their bows pointing outward like spokes on a wheel. The formation was too precise to be accidental, but its purpose remains obscure. Were the ships arranged this way before burial as part of a ritual? Did they sink in a body of water whose currents created the pattern? Or were they placed by people who knew they were going to be buried, creating a marker or message for future generations? Similar clustering appears in other locations. Peru's coastal deserts contain multiple sites where ships are grouped in 2s and 3s, often at identical burial depths and orientations. The consistency suggests these weren't random strandings, but deliberate placements. Yet the effort required to bury even one ship is substantial. Digging a pit large enough to accommodate a 40-foot vessel in hard desert soil would take weeks of labor. Burying multiple ships in coordinated positions would be a massive undertaking, comparable to constructing a major monument. Why would ancient peoples invest such resources in burying ships? One theory suggests these were ritual offerings, vessels sent to accompany the dead into the afterlife, buried in deserts because the dry conditions were thought to preserve them for eternity. But most of these ships show no association with human burials. They sit alone, sometimes with cargo still aboard, sometimes empty, but rarely with any bodies or grave goods that would indicate a funerary purpose. Another possibility is that the ships were hidden deliberately, stored in desert locations because they were valuable and needed to be preserved for future use. But that raises obvious questions. If you're storing ships for later use, why bury them so deeply? And why in deserts so far from water that recovering them would be nearly impossible? The arrangement patterns persist across continents and cultures, suggesting either a common impulse in human behavior we don't understand, or environmental conditions that repeatedly create similar burial circumstances. Neither explanation is satisfying, and both leave the fundamental question unanswered. Who decided to put these ships in the desert, and what were they thinking? Every desert ship discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that refuses to form a coherent picture. We have the physical evidence: wood, metal, rope, sails, all real, all measurable, all definitively ancient. We have the locations, mapped and verified, places where ships have no logical reason to be. We have dating that places these vessels within human history, not some prehistoric epoch beyond memory. Yet we can't construct a narrative that accommodates all the facts. The climatic explanation requires water where geological records show none existed. The human transport theory requires capabilities and motivations we see no other evidence for. The preservation mysteries suggest burial conditions we can't replicate or fully explain. And the chronological contradictions point to timelines that don't match any accepted historical framework. What if we're asking the wrong questions? What if these ships aren't anomalies to be explained away, but evidence of a historical reality we've completely missed? The standard model of human civilization assumes gradual, linear development. Hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies to complex civilizations, each stage building on the last, each transformation documented and understood. But what if that model is incomplete? What if there were civilizations that rose and fell between the periods we've studied, cultures that developed sophisticated maritime technology, and then vanished so completely that only their ships remain? The desert locations themselves might be clues. Perhaps these vessels were deliberately placed in the most inhospitable environments, precisely because those environments would preserve them longest. Maybe ancient peoples understood something about time and preservation that we're only beginning to rediscover, that the best place to hide something for thousands of years isn't in a tomb or temple that might be looted, but in a desert so hostile that no one would think to look there until technology advanced enough to make such searches possible. Or perhaps the truth is simpler and stranger. Maybe Earth's geography has been far more dynamic than we realize, shifting and changing so rapidly that entire seas can appear and vanish within historical timeframes, leaving ships stranded in what become deserts almost overnight. If that's the case, then these vessels aren't mysteries at all. They're warnings, evidence that the planet's climate and geography can transform faster and more completely than we've ever imagined. Every established answer raises more questions. Every new discovery contradicts something we thought we knew. The ships keep emerging from the sand, one after another, each one impossible, each one real. They're waiting there. Beneath the dunes, in places they shouldn't be, preserved in ways they shouldn't survive, dated to times that don't make sense. And with each excavation, each analysis, each attempt to understand what we're looking at, the mystery deepens rather than resolves. We built the ships, we sailed them, we somehow left them in deserts. But somewhere between those simple facts and now, we lost the story of how and why. The evidence is buried all around us, scattered across the driest places on Earth. Maybe we'll eventually piece together what happened. Or maybe these ships are meant to remain mysteries, reminders that human history contains chapters we haven't even begun to read. The desert keeps its secrets well, but every wind that shifts the sand might reveal another vessel, another impossible artifact, another question we don't yet know how to answer. If you're as fascinated by these mysteries as we are, make sure you're subscribed, because there are dozens more ancient enigmas like this waiting to be explored, each one stranger than the last.